Hello, everyone. Thank all of you to be here. As all of you know, we have the Center for India-China Studies. It's a multidisciplinary center. And thank Suruchi for bringing such a distinguished honorary speaker to us. We have the Indian-China lunch talk from the beginning of the center. So this is the 13th one. It's a good number in Chinese. We have this. We also have other events like the India-China seminar, like last year with the Peking University, we have the India-China forum, like social development with the class and with the different topics. I really welcome all of you, to have a contribution and support to the center because it's very multidisciplinary. Actually, Suruchi is a affiliated fellow from School of Journalism with us. Now I want to give the floor to Suruchi to introduce our very distinguished guest speaker and to open this talk. Thank you.
Off कर रखा है क्या वो?
Thank you very much.
Mic off.
It gives me great pleasure to kind of introduce Professor Thusu. I mean, he's one of the pioneering scholars of Indian media studies, and actually anyone who has taken scholarly interest in the study of Indian media would be familiar with Professor Thusu's work. I'm not reading out from his bio, it's already, some of you will be familiar. Till recently, he was with the University of Westminster. He was the co-director of the Indian Media Center there, and he's currently with the Tsinghua University in Beijing. He's a distinguished visiting scholar, visiting professor, and the inaugural Disney chair in global media. And actually, Professor Thusu, just to kind of take give a little more context to his presence, for today's talk at the China Media Center, way back in 2010, Professor Thusu actually organized this conference on Chindia, or the China plus Indian media, and that was one of the great conferences that happened as part of the International Communication Association meetings in Singapore in 2010, and that was also published as some of the presentations were collated as as a publication, and he has been after that written many other publications that many of you would be familiar with. So and it's a great pleasure. I'm very glad that Professor Thusu could come all the way from Delhi to give us be with us here. So I mean, without much delay, I would give the floor to Professor Thusu.
Thank you very much. I'm here because of Dr. Majumdar. I had heard of this university, I had never been to this part of India. It's good to come to a university which has global in its title. I suppose that's the first in India. I'm not talking about those shops which have come up and called them universities, but a proper university with global in its title. So that is interesting. But even more interesting for somebody like me who is an Indian academic who's worked in the West for 30 years and now is working in the East. It's an incredible feeling to find that there's a Chinese professor here who leads an India-China center. Hugely important and much needed, because there is, in my experience, extraordinary levels of ignorance on both sides. And in fact, more of the Chinese studies for reasons I don't need to enumerate to this now. The conference you mentioned in 2010 was actually called Chindia Challenge to Global Communication. So there was a question mark there. And it's an interesting thought. If really China and India were to get together, or even became, not get together, but were less critical or hostile to each other, let's end up Western history. And nobody wants to lose that history. So there's a very interesting debate going on as the power shifts away from these traditional centers. The dynamic between India and China is going to be perhaps the most important in the days. So it's a wonderful initiative to have this center and a global university. My topic today is about soft power and of course the role of media in that. I did a book on India's soft power. In 2013 it came out, the Indian edition came out in 2016. And while I was researching that, I found that there are many more books of Chinese software. In fact, at least half a dozen books in English, and many more in Chinese. And China is often seen as a hard power, as an economic power, increasingly as a military power, not a soft power. So, in my previous job at University of Westminster in London, I was, apart from being the founder, co-director of India Media Center, research advisor to China Media Center. And China Media Center is one of the biggest in Europe and the earliest actually in Europe also. And in that capacity, one got a very good idea about the debates both in China and in the West about China. So today's presentation is sort of a combination of that experience, and also more recently being in Beijing at an American college, in a top university in China, in itself a very interesting soft power project, because Schwarzman College, if some of you may not know about it, it's a relatively recent college, is like Rhodes Scholars in China, but with American money. So it's a soft power project for the United States as well as for China. So I don't want to go into discussion of what soft power is and how it is exercised. That's not the forum for that. This is not a forum for that. But just to say that debate has moved from soft to smart to sharp power. And sharp powers are very clearly marked as Russia and China, perforating this whole liberal order which has dominated the discourse. In fact, while I'm based in Beijing, Joseph Nye is also a visiting professor, and we had a very long conversation. He was there in January about soft power, and it was interesting how he still, despite his enormous experience, looks at China in a particular way, a very American way, I would say. Partly because China is also seen, and I would say accurately, as a hard power, an increasingly military power. Here are some examples where it is how it's used in Australia, or with Djibouti as the first declared base in Africa, and as well as in South China Sea. There is a concern, not just in Western world, but also in this part of the world, about growing Chinese military presence. Even more significant and better known is the Chinese economic presence. I did some data crunching looking at the Fortune 500 companies, and in the last, maybe just 2016, the latest figure available, the number of companies in Fortune 500, the Chinese companies, have grown from 10 to 109. And there is a corresponding decline of American companies in that list. And as you see, every 5 years, the number of Chinese companies in Fortune 500 have doubled. And this is an American magazine. This is not Chinese government data. It's not massaged and expanded. It's well known. And of course, the way corporations work is more complicated because ownership structures can be diffused. But you get a sense that there is a shift. If you go back before mid-1990s, you'd hardly find any Chinese company in the top 500. Even more interesting than that is the what I call the geopolitics of global trade. This is from a book called Connectography, which was published a few years ago by Parag Khanna. I think now he's in Singapore. He was at Harvard. Countries for which China is the largest trading partner, 124. Corresponding figure for US is 56. So these are again real facts on the ground. Trading, geopolitics has changed in the last decade or so. So if Chinese presence is growing, Chinese economy is integrating to various parts of the world, trade being a central component of that. Chinese culture and Chinese communication and Chinese discourse and Chinese narrative is also globalizing. We see that, for instance, some recent work on expansion of Chinese aid, especially in Africa, and aid seen as a soft power instrument. And it's always been a soft power instrument for traditional powers, but now China too is, progress in this field is phenomenal. Similarly, this is a more recent book about Chinese media's expansion in Africa and how that operates as a soft power narrative for China. There's also this is a very famous book, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, called Charm Offensive. It's actually a journalistic account, it's not a particularly serious book, but it got very major exposure. And the Chinese were, this phrase charm defensive is from a Chinese professor who said that, well, we are not actually trying to dominate the world, we are on the defensive, we are not on the offensive. Hence the phrase charm defensive. But this is just an example of the literature, the academic literature which has emerged in the last decade or so on China's soft power. Also, and again, most of you know this, expansion of Confucius schools and university, centers and universities around the world is also growing. I know it's not very strong in India, but in many other countries it's pretty, and not without controversy. Perhaps the most significant change is the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which is called One Belt, One Road. And this is the arguably the biggest infrastructure project in the modern world. It's a 10-year project, trillions of dollars involved, 900 projects. It's going to change the geography of Eurasia and beyond. Some of it's already started, as you know. The China-Pakistan economic corridor is part of BRI initiative, and the reason India is not a signatory to BRI is precisely that. No government in Delhi, irrespective of its ideological orientation, can say that we can be part of a project part of which cross areas which are disputed, both regionally, bilaterally, and internationally. But as you see in this map, there is, although Kolkata should be shown there, this is a map from Western sources, because Kolkata is not Kolkata, but there is a maritime silk route, if you like, and a land-based one. Now, given that context, the economic context, political context, how do you tell that narrative to the world? How do you tell the world that BRI is, for example, win-win for all? This is how the China Daily, for example, views BRI. Everybody is happy, it's song and dance, there are no issues, it's not a geopolitical project, we are not going to, dominate any part of the world. This is how others see it. At a time when the Western world is, with Mr. Trump, for example, is sort of looking inwards, China is expanding. I mentioned earlier my own academic background. I have actually a PhD in international relations, so I'm coming to communication from a sort of IR perspective. And we produced a book which came out last year, which was the first book in English language about the globalization of Chinese media, or China's media go global. And if you haven't seen it, I don't know if you got it here in the library. It emerged from a major conference being organized at Tsinghua University a few 2.5 years ago now. So again, I'll go through this very quickly because you're familiar with this, I expect. The major media internationally emanating from China: Xinhua, CGTN, China Global Television Network, previously called CCTV, China Radio International, People's Daily, and China Radio. They have now been consolidated into one global media instrument. But the most important within it is CGTN. As you see on this map, CGTN has various specialized feeds, networks, including for Africa and the United States, but also available in Russian, in French, in Arabic, and in Spanish. In fact, I'm teaching a course on geopolitics and global communication next month, and we're going to take our scholars to CGTN as part of the course to get them an experience of this huge network. Also, China Radio International has huge presence. In fact, it has the largest number of language services of any major broadcaster in the world, other than Voice of America, BBC, Deutsche Welle, etc. Which also has, I use the word client, private radio stations or non-NGO run radio stations, especially in the United States, but elsewhere too, which are essentially funded by the Chinese government. And of course, Xinhua is a very important international news agency, has been actually pretty big since the 1980s, especially in the developing world. And as you see in this chart, it has now as many foreign bureaus as the major ones, the AFP or Reuters. So in terms of journalism, there has been extraordinary expansion of Chinese journalism. Whether it's television, newspaper, People's Daily, China Daily I haven't mentioned, but China Daily they've just launched in January a global edition. And it's actually quite an improved version of what used to be available. But their agenda is very different from the news agenda. The journalistic narrative is very different from what you and I in the more open systems are used to. The phrase they use is constructive journalism as against critical journalism, which itself is actually the original idea of constructive journalism comes from a Danish academic research. It's not a Chinese original idea. And despite having put a huge amount of money, and I'm talking of billions of dollars here, annually on external communication, including the broadcasting, how many people are watching these programs or engaging with these, and what is their impact remains unclear. And in all those years, I'm still waiting for a Chinese network or Chinese newspaper or Chinese radio station to break an international story. A story which becomes a story. It's not happening. And that's deliberate. They are not in that game. I think the game is far more sophisticated. Yeah? Because it's not just about journalism, it's also about infrastructure, broadband, satellite services, etc. And this may not sound big in London or in New York or in Brussels, but in Addis Ababa and Dhaka it works. And that is the audience they're after. In the West, they're after audience to tell the world that, China is not a threat. So, and also to react against negative or distorted coverage in mainstream Western media. Apart from journalism, there's also another aspect of the soft power project is the entertainment media. Now, as you all know, unlike India, which is pretty good in that field because it is the home to largest film factory in the world, China has not yet produced exportable entertainment. But this film, some of you may have seen it. It was Wolf and then Wolf 2. Did very well in China. Was also actually noticed outside China. Has anybody seen this film? Okay. I mean, I watched it on a long haul flight. And what struck me about this movie was the way they dealt with questions of sovereignty and international law. Because some of you may know, it's a film about an imaginary terrorism infected country in Africa, and this guy goes and, like the Americans have been doing for 60 years, they even save you from Mars. But this is that more realistic. It's an African country, and he goes there, and the Chinese Navy is in this ocean. He doesn't go in till they have a clear instruction from the United Nations that yes, you can go in. So very interesting contrast with the Hollywood version of this. And I think instructive in that sense, in terms of this idea of global governance. So, in terms of entertainment also, there is a huge investment in building film cities, a lot of investment from Hollywood also, the kind of, in Hollywood as well. So there are films made in Hollywood with Chinese themes or sensitivity to Chinese census establishment. But China is still new in the game. In terms of dealing with the others, it still lacks a sophistication that, for example, Europeans have for historical reasons. So, for instance, this was last year's Chinese New Year Gala, which 1 billion people watched. It's the largest television event in China, global. And there was a Chinese woman dressed in as Nigerian with black face, something the Americans and the Europeans used to do in 1940s or 50s or maybe 60s, but long time ago. This was last year. And this was in CCTV, which is on television. So that understanding of difference, of ethnicities, of cultures, there's a lot to do. And that's a particular problem because China, as I mentioned in the beginning, is expanding, is investing in all these countries. So if you have no idea what is the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism and you're operating in India, you have a little problem. Similarly, you don't know what is Shia Islam and Sunni Islam. So you're investing a lot of money in Muslim countries. And that is something which actually is, to my understanding, not properly addressed, whether at a policy level or at a university level or perhaps more strikingly in journalism. Very little. But one area where Chinese soft power is going to become even more visible and important is what's happening to the Chinese internet. Now we all know internet was conceived and developed in the United States. It was a Pentagon project which had Cold War roots. It was a security project until it was privatized. And even today, its governance, its infrastructure, its commerce is still controlled by a very few, mostly American companies. That is the case for also the rest of the world. Because in this country, for instance, WhatsApp and Facebook has the largest audience in the world. China has done something different. I use the phrase cyber capitalism with Chinese characteristics in the book I mentioned earlier. So as you see in this is in the book I just published. This diagram is from that book. Every major digital property that exists globally has a Chinese version, whether it is search engines, shopping, messaging, etc., etc. No other country has been able to do that. Germany, France, Russia, India has 1.2 billion people. We can't even produce a mobile phone. We can send, our vehicle to Mars at the cost of a Hollywood film. It's a remarkable achievement. But we can't produce a mobile phone. 70% of the market in this country is controlled by Chinese smartphones. So, as more and more people get on space, a Chinese internet, so the debate about Chinese internet is restricted to two words: censorship and control, which is very important. We are used to, I grew up in India, the largest democracy in the world. I lived in the oldest democracy for 30 years. And I'm working in American college, so I have access to all the, Google, and I'm protected. I'm in a bubble. But my Chinese colleagues have restrictions, my Chinese students have restrictions. So that's a very important issue about control and regulation. But by focusing on that, perhaps we missed out at the bigger picture. Right? That there is also electronic commerce. There is also, you can use this connectivity to develop the country. China has a very special program called Internet Plus. And also, and some of these companies, as you know, Alibaba, etc., they are global companies today. TikTok, I didn't know until a few months ago, that it's a Chinese company. It's very big in this country. It's very big in Indonesia. Paytm, we pay, a lot of it is owned by Chinese. In the mobile space, the current problem with the United States is much more complex, but 5G is quite a big component of that, because this is about Internet of Things. This is it's a game changer. And China is ahead of everybody else in this sphere. It's ahead of Europeans, it's ahead of Americans, it's ahead of Japanese and Koreans. Okay? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but the Chinese mobile payment system is the most sophisticated in the world. In 3 years, they were able to give 1 billion plus people mobile payment system, and it works. I have an NRI account, I was at the State Bank, big bank in India, in Grand Place. And he says, I have a machine, it's not working. I'm waiting there for an hour. This is central of Delhi, of India's capital. This is IT power. It's a fantastic institution, very clever people. The machine is working. I've been going to China for many years, I've lived there for some time. I've never had that experience. So something that one should think about. So, how does then this lead to, a Chinese narrative, which is increasingly being viewed outside or consumed outside China? I've used the phrase sign of globalization with a question mark. You may remember 2 years ago at the World Economic Forum, for the first time, Chinese president was the keynote speaker. And his speech could have been, if you were to go back a few years and read the American president's speech about globalization, opening of markets, deregulation, etc., etc., it was like that, frictionless capitalism. At a time when you had Brexit, when Europe was looking, inwards, when you had somebody who had no background in public office, whose claim to fame was a reality TV show, was elected as president of the most powerful nation on the planet, likely to be elected again. So, it's an interesting shift in terms of the debates about globalization. And as I said earlier, the way Chinese media and with Chinese economic connectedness is growing with other parts of the world, and the media expansion is taking the same place at the same time, there is some interesting possibilities of looking at the whole debate about sort of soft power in a different way. Because unlike the American version of it, which is very US-centric, China is a civilizational power. I make the same argument in the book I wrote about India. I use the phrase de-Americanizing soft power. You know, a civilization state has so many other influences. And cultures are so much more complicated. But because increasingly this cultural transaction and the movement is through digital space, therefore I mentioned the importance of Chinese internet. So as this grows and professionalizes further, will it produce a different kind of narrative? In other words, will it be contra to the dominant narrative, or will it be complementary? My understanding of Chinese media, which I do study a little bit, is that it is not, it's quite bland and bureaucratic and deliberately not provocative. And there are also very, very strong financial, economic interconnections which it doesn't want to accept, as long as it helps its own expansion and growth. But internet is, Chinese internet is the largest in the world, and as I said earlier, it's going to go beyond China. It's already available in different languages, and it will be interesting to see how then that relates to the governance, the infrastructure, the commerce of it. And already there are interesting shifts beginning to take shape, as this Economist cover story indicates. We'll talk about digital Cold War now. But perhaps most importantly, for the Indian context, and I find it particularly illuminating or instructive as an Indian scholar who is working in China, is what China has been able to do in terms of dealing with the issue of poverty. Right? It remains a developing country despite its extraordinary growth. And this development is not done by NGOs, by DFID, by USAID, by Oxfam. It's done by a much maligned one-party state. So sitting in this country, this amazingly big and noisy and vibrant democracy, we're still looking at ideas from the West about what should we do about development. Not just us, but the whole developmental discourse is a Western discourse. It's funded by the West. And there are structural constraints in which this is, the way money is distributed and how it is managed. So, if you're sitting in Addis Ababa or in Dhaka, the examples I mentioned earlier, and you have to make a choice between liberal democracy and one party, so people are not bothered with that. You and I might be bothered, but the average person wants better standard of living. I don't need to tell the enlightened audience like this one which way will they go and are going. It's interesting to compare the two, India and China. And I would this is my last slide, time for some conversation. This is some data from Atlas at Sustainable Development Goals of World Bank 2017. I'll just seek your indulgence for 30 seconds to look at it carefully. In 1990, 756 million people in China lived in extreme poverty, which is less than $2 a day in purchasing power parity terms. That's how World Bank defines extreme poverty. In the same year, India only had 338 million people living in extreme poverty. In other words, China had double the number of people living in extreme poverty in 1990. Remember, China opens up to the world in late 70s, right? And by 1990, it already has those economic zones. It already has become the factory to the world. We're all wearing Chinese clothes by then. It still has 700 plus million people living in extreme poverty. Fast forward to 2013, that figure is shrunk to 25 million. India has 218 million. She's got 100 plus out of. China has got 700 million people out of poverty. I was sharing these figures with the distinguished group of Chinese scholars, and senior guy said to me afterwards, next time you're here, that 25 million will be gone. And I trust him, because they have a track record. So, if you're talking about soft power, obsessed with what the Americans think of you, which is the Indians are obsessed with that, right? It doesn't matter. If you deliver, there's 80% of the world's population which is poor, and they want to improve their life. And that's where the Chinese soft power is exercising itself, and I would argue very effective. And therefore, the Chinese mainstream media, the central media, that its focus is not so much on although they have operations in London and New York, and they get very excited what New York Times writes about them. And I said, it was only a newspaper. Why are you getting so excited? Put them at their place. It's a newspaper. They don't get excited about what they read in People's Daily. Nobody cares. And I think that thinking is beginning to take shape. Also, I notice in this country, which is wonderful. So that is where the soft power discourse, in my opinion, is going to go away from the dominant discourse, which is really has a very strong American accent. On that note, I'll stop. Thank you for your patience.
So now we are open the floor for questions. This is a very kind of precious opportunity for all the faculty and students to ask questions.
Yes.
Actually, I was right now, as you know, that there's a the escalation between India and Pakistan this morning has even escalated. I'm sorry, I was just there's a virtual war going on because Pakistan claims to have shot down India. So at least one fighter jet is down. 4 pilots are dead. We don't know whether that's been shot down or not. But that's a claims and counterclaims. Something that we studied studied over the last couple of years in information and communication is that the new age warfare is going to be information warfare. How do you think is China positioned in information warfare?
I don't. That's not my area of expertise. I don't really know a lot about that.
But this currently is, so they're using media basically.
Sure, but there also, when I mentioned internet and I mentioned 5G, it also has a very strong security and surveillance context. And in fact, China has one of the most sophisticated surveillance systems in place, face recognition. And so for example, I have an Indian passport, although I've lived out for 30 years. When I went to China in November last year, and I put my passport in, this machine talked to me in Hindi, incorrect Hindi, but Hindi. And my wife is English, so she has a European passport, and I was English, and so I had to. Then I was telling somebody who is an expert in artificial intelligence, I said, look, India is a multi-language country. See, if I was a Tamilian, I wouldn't know what this woman is asking me to do, right? But in the Chinese mind, India, okay, Hindi is the most big, spoken language, so let's do it. So, so what I'm saying is they're trying to introduce this AI and this big debate about AI and its sort of surveillance aspect. So I think China has a highly sophisticated system, but as I say, it's not my domain knowledge. And there have been stories about hacking, that is rooted in China in various kind of contexts, including, and most importantly, in terms of corporate, intellectual property right, corporate secrets, etc. So I suspect there's not just China, Russia, as it said, and America. Let's not forget, it all began there. So and it's an integral part of warfare, and even at peacetime, information, how information is managed and negotiated, narrated is and will remain very. And I'm sure in the India-Pakistan case at the moment, I was watching yesterday. I was telling your colleague, there's a little rap video which has been released by BJP yesterday. It was on CNIB website. It's a rap song, 30 seconds. It says Bande mein hai dum. This guy has got guts, right? And the Gully Boy, this film just been released, it's got a rap song. So they are addressing a particular constituency of young Indians who will vote for the first time. So that's also a part of warfare, if you like, in electoral warfare.
Absolutely.
So that's just integral. I wouldn't say China is particularly, I would say it's very well. This is very well developed in China. Also for domestic use, as I mentioned, in terms of face recognition, it's a very very sophisticated system. And I mentioned mobile already.
I'm sorry to excuse myself. I have to join this warfare.
Oh God! I studied journalism.
I teach journalism.
I know. We met in Hyderabad many years ago.
Many years ago. I do know. I was very happy that you were coming here, but I couldn't spend.
Are you in faculty?
I am.
Oh, fantastic.
I am. Yeah. I've left active journalism. I just
You are analyzing.
I do flirt with journalism, and I had a little reservation.
Yes.
When you mentioned the book and you said that it's a journalistic account, not a serious book.
Yes. Well, that's a longer discussion.
So maybe Professor Shito and then.
From here also.
Yeah.
Yes. Nice to see you again, sir.
Sorry,
I'm Tao from Tsinghua University, and I
Have
think
we met? Sorry, excuse me.
in 2014.
Okay,
And
excuse me.
when you were giving a speech at Oxford University, and I was a visiting student
At the Reuters Institute.
Oxford.
At the Reuters Institute in Oxford?
I think you were giving a speech on Indian soft power at the time you just been marking your book.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And now
I'm sorry for not.
of course, still the same distance. I mean, at that time.
Right.
I tend to agree all the political and ideological reasons that China now is China's soft power strategy is lagging behind its hard power status. And my question would be, do you perceive is there any cultural reasons on this? Because in China we used to have some, for example, we say make your fortune quietly, 没事发大财. And of course, we have also say domestic shame should not be made public.
Yes.
家丑不外扬. And that's why for a long time we see either Chinese strategists or government officials, we tend to downplay or ignore, if I can say so, the role of soft power. And then it's still quite a new thing in China. So I would like to.
Okay, thank you. That's actually several questions.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say very briefly. Mobile number. Sorry. The problem is that I mentioned that in relation to the slide I showed about the New Year Gala event. As an Indian, I experience it every day in China. Although I've been away, so I'm not kind of typical Indian, but I'm very Indian. The knowledge of India and China is abysmally low, and I use my words very carefully. Because what would they know? How would they know? There's very little. So when I saw you, I was very happy to see Columbia educated lawyer running this place. It's fantastic. There's very little understanding of, because I mentioned religion, but more broadly culture, there's very little understanding. And not just India, more generally. And I think that is again a process. It takes time for people to, so for example, today you have in China, most Chinese universities, just too small in the world, if not all over the world, but large number of countries. And there's a kind of interpersonal communication taking place which is outside the official discourse. Because official discourse, pardon me saying so, is extremely limited and I would use the word boring. Yeah? Because the soft power discourse is top down, it's a state discourse. Right? And China is far more interesting place. And this idea of face is also interesting to Chinese, as I mentioned in the New York Times. Why are Chinese so overtly sensitive about tiny amount of criticism? They should be strong enough. Like Indians say, okay, we have problems. They're open. Say, when I was walking this global university, it was quite stinky outside. That's okay. That's okay. Right? I just had spent some days in Shantiniketan in eastern India, great university set up by Tagore. And there was a Chinese professor who was visiting for the first time to India and to Shantiniketan. So she flew to Bombay and she couldn't believe that you have a university where there are no high buildings. Because she's in Beijing, and Tsinghua is like,
yes.
And they're called building A, B, C, D, it's so boring, it's frightening. I was at a university in Delhi and our hostels were named after rivers of India. Ganga, Satluj, some kind of thought in it. It wasn't just, A, B, C, D, because that's sort of socialism. Anyway,
But we also have sector 1 to
yeah, exactly. Same in Russia. That's the socialist legacy. But the point I'm making is that the Chinese have to take culture more broadly, more seriously. At the moment, there is a massive gap there. We're doing a big event in Beijing, hopefully in May, about this whole Chinese. We're going to call it something like China's culture go global. And you say, well, how will you go global if you don't understand the global culture? Yeah, and I think it's a process. And that's why I mentioned the economic aspect at the beginning of my talk. Because if Chinese companies are investing in different parts of the world, people are working in these countries, they're hiring people from different countries, there's a lot of interaction already taking place, and I suspect it's going to grow. So, there was a really...
Yeah, we have this faculty.
One of the stories that I think a lot of us have been talking about in the last year was the entire episode with Fan Bingbing and the use of very deliberate, using television as a very deliberate form of expose and then absolute silence to follow up, and then the use of social media with a figure who is in that sense a global celebrity, and ensuring that there was no information escaping in any way about where she was, what was happening. How do you think the different mediums play a role in both the silencing and the exposure of information?
The mainstream media I mentioned, the central media, is, this is a kind of boring thing to say, but it is totally controlled, right? And it's not going to change anytime soon.
Right.
Let's not forget the political structure is a one-party state, the media are state-owned, and media follow the party line, right? No question about that. But there is, in the cyberspace, there's actually a lot more happening. There's no coincidence that the Chinese blogosphere was always the kind of alternative media in China, in the beginning of the internet. Today the internet is so big, the social media is so huge. I have a WeChat account in China because I'm very bad with social media, but I cannot manage without that. Everything happens on WeChat. So, to my great chagrin, but I have to, it's my age. Anyway, so the point is that, whether the example you gave or any other controversial topic, there is a lot more in the social media, both critical and sort of state-sponsored content. And the Chinese censorship regime is also very sophisticated. It's not as crude as sometimes we are allowed to think. There was a very interesting study in Harvard a couple of years ago about how the VPNs work.
Yeah.
So the Chinese government is aware of what is the debate going on, and they're okay. Let's not talk about pornography. It doesn't matter. Let's talk about something. It's okay, but there are red lines. So I'll give you a personal example. I was in Peking University 2 years ago in the guest house, and this Doklam thing was going on. And I know you were ex-NDTV. You were in London also.
I was.
Yeah. So I was watching NDTV, and for the first, this was the border one. You were here, you would know. So the CGTN and there was the Chinese ones were very aggressive, but from visuals I didn't know the language. But they stopped after 2 days. They just blocked it because they knew this guy. Who is this guy? Why is he watching this? And NDTV is a very sober channel, so there was not like cyber racking. They were getting analysis of what was happening. So that is there. And I think the especially the younger generation of Chinese students and scholars and their exposure to the internet age and their studies in outside China has made a huge difference. But the structures, especially mainstream media, they remain very controlled. In fact, in the last few years, they have been even more stricter than before.
Yes. So there's
Students.
okay. Now let's have a student's question.
Sir, the Portland Communications Report of 2018 ranks China at the 27th position.
Say it again.
The Portland Communications Software 30 Index
Yes.
ranks China at 27.
Oh, it's on power terms. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's 27.
Yes.
So how important is rankings when it comes to soft power? Because India also didn't rank in the 30 list, but India they had a separate session on Indo-Pacific, and they told India is like a rising democracy.
Yes.
So how is democracy also plays an important role?
Well, I'm very suspicious of these listicles. I hate them. So university listings. I went to the best university in this country, and that's a fantastic university. Highly intellectual people there. Not good rooms. Rooms are not very good, but intellectually they're very good. You look at the listings of the university. JNU doesn't appear. And you go to some really third-rate university in Singapore. It's got a beautiful room, and the guy is wearing a suit, and they have good technology because that's the measuring system. And then I did a journal, 2 journals. I'm probably published book series. I know how that works. So there's that index. How many we published? This is a very personal opinion. I'm actually very skeptical of that. And it gets too much. I'm writing actually a book on this topic. I'm calling it the changing geopolitics of global communication, which is a course I'm also teaching at Shortman College. And I'm looking at this kind of information infrastructure. So somebody puts this listicle out, so that's the sharp power thing I mentioned. The moment that report came out, New York Times had an article, Economist had an article, Guardian had an editorial, and suddenly it becomes it doesn't mean anything. Sharp power doesn't mean anything. It becomes a phrase. It becomes an intellectual paradigm because some idiot has coined that phrase. So you see what I mean? I think we have to be extremely sensitive to this and say it doesn't matter. It is somebody's opinion. Now, this is related to power structure. So what the Chinese did, they said, okay, we'll make our own list of universities. So Tsinghua is now 30 or something, right? In the Times one, but they have their own listings. And I think my response would be, let's not take this very seriously. They are construct, they are, the criteria are, in my view, deeply problematic.
Even I also had a question, sir, regarding the Confucius Institutes.
Sorry, what Confucius?
Confucius Institutes, are they efficient in improving relations between the two nations?
I'll be not able to answer that precisely because I don't know. That's the straight answer. Because the book I mentioned, that is one of them is written by a German scholar who's done very detailed analysis of it. But you see, again, it's a long-term project. So the idea is, Confucius itself, if you know about Chinese history, during the communist period, Confucius was really looked down upon. It was not allowed to be taught. Because it was seen as feudal and anti-progress, etc., etc. And it's like, they have reincarnated it and projected as the kind of, peaceful life and, So, I think the main outcome of it is the language issue in terms of people learning Mandarin. As you know, there's also a school system, Mandarin, Confucius classes. But it's also been controversial in terms of the idea that it actually is projecting Chinese geopolitical interests, promoting certain, narratives, etc. And there have been cases in the US, for instance, there was a petition filed by some academics, top universities, saying we don't want these Confucius institutes to operate in the United States because there is a government agenda to promote Chinese interests. But you could say, well, what is the British Council's agenda? What is the agenda of, other institutions, right? Their job is to promote their country, their interests. I think Chinese need a bit more subtlety, but actually they're doing something very similar as the Americans or Europeans have done.
Okay, we have 2 final questions. Okay, so it's in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's probably tangential to the talk in some ways, but I was really curious. A few years back, there is this scholar, an economist, an economic historian essentially, called Prasannan Parthasarathy, who wrote this rather clumsily titled book called How Europe Became Rich and India Became Poor.
Okay, I can know the question.
So, and it's called The Great Divergence.
Great Divergence.
Yeah, so this is a kind this is a full-fledged area of inquiry of how Asia became poor and Europe became rich and all of that. So it seems from your talk that there is a bigger divergence to be spoken about when it comes to India and China.
Yes.
I'm saying this because you refer to China as a civilizational power, right? And India as well. Is there enough literature on how this divergence took place, when it took place? Is it colonialism? Only different forms of colonialism? Is it communism? How do we? Because India and China has shared a very, very close relationship for a very long period of time. It is only in the in the last century perhaps that divergence is.
This is again like earlier question, several set of questions, and it deserves a drink and a longer conversation. It's a fantastic question. Do you know Tan Sen?
Yeah.
He's just published a very interesting. He's now he's NYU Global. He's in New York. In Shanghai, and I'm hoping to go and see him next month, end of March. He's done a very interesting study of China-India relations in a global context, global connectivity. And he's relatively young, So he's that India. He's the real. So there is some work beginning to emerge which looks at the civilizational, links. But in my field, in communication, hardly anything. Even among historians, because it is not just colonialism. So if you think of the link of Buddhism, which is so strong, and then more recently there was this Nalanda project, which Chinese government was involved in, and given it was an Indian project, it was in India rather. So they have built their own Buddhist university, by the way, 2 years ago. And so there is that connection. And then because of colonial history, if you think of McMahon Line, who was McMahon? How was these lines drawn? That's the colonial legacy we have, and we're dealing with it. But I think, as I said at the beginning, if these two countries were to actually start, because actually the problems, if you think of 62 war, which is seen as, China was enemy, or they see us as enemy. If you contrast that with what happened with Japan, if you contrast with what happened in France and Germany, what happened in Vietnam, or what happened in Algeria, that's a skirmish, right? So, beyond that, there has never been a problem. And there is that civilizational links. When I went to China for the first time, 2004 it was, and I had a colleague, Chinese colleague with me, who was a PhD student at that time. She's now a reader in our University of London. And I was asking her questions about why is it like this, why. She said, "There you're asking very different questions than other colleagues." I said, "Look, I'm not white. I'm not here to lecture you, I'm here to learn from you." Because what struck me most as I went there is how do they deal with poverty and how come we have failed? Because I didn't know these figures then, right? But I could see. And that struck me as something is, which we need to learn from them. And I think some of this dichotomy, democracy versus dictatorship, if you go into philosophical look of it, it's actually the Semitic tradition of either or. That you see in Judaism, that you see in Christianity, that you see in Islam. In the Indian tradition, there's always an and. It's not either or. And that and is the most interesting part. So, as I said, China has lots of issues. The development they have achieved has come at a cost of enormous damage to the environment. The sociological change in China is just outstanding, extraordinary in sort of both positive and negative sense. But there's also the other things that I said went wrong. So it cannot be either or. It has to be seen, at the end. And I think that's the way to, in my view, to think about the civilizational connection. And that would only come when we teach our children at school, at university. We all know about Shakespeare. We don't know about Chinese writers, poets. The assumption is there was no poetry in China or no painting in China. Right? So it's a much bigger epistemological problem. And that has a colonial history. And now our friends in the Sangh, they are trying to project something which is illiterate or semi-literate. You need intelligent people come together and think of alternatives. And that doesn't happen in one generation. It takes time because the systems are set for so long and they're so strong. So, as I say, it's a longer conversation. Somebody else? Oh yes, sorry.
So you've spoken about the immense development of the Chinese communication and information resources. At the same time, these, because being state-owned, at the same time, also China as a civilization power kind of faces certain shortcomings. So do you see, still see this Chinese communication resources qualifying as providing or succeeding in providing a contra-flow in the communication landscape, which would be like a real challenge to the Western flow that has traditionally kind of dominated the media landscape?
I think that would happen eventually because the scale and scope of change is so huge. Numbers involved are so huge. And as I said in my second last slide, at the moment it's not necessarily contra, it's in fact complementary to the dominant flows. But as China's influence increases further, it will have to have its own narrative, which would be then also consumed by others in the world. In that sense, you would have an alternate. That's not to say it's not either or thing. It might be a different perspective. And I'm sure before long, India would have its place there too, because India has actually all the ingredients are there, right? And not by just India and China. They would be. Russia has always been an important country. Iran is important. Brazil. So there is this idea that there is a multipolarity in the world. It's not just if you remember after the Cold War, it was declared that now the world is unipolar. It's American-led world. America is an extremely powerful country and it's likely to remain one, but it is not the only power in the world. Right? So it has always been. And if you go back, if you think of what Nehru was writing in the 40s, before India was independent. He was saying these things. Then when India was a colony, he was thinking, okay, there will be a multipolar world, there will be China will be one. And remember, India was you may not know this, but India was offered a permanent seat at the United Nations. And Nehru said, no, it belongs to China. So Taiwan, a tiny state, became permanent member of the United Nations Security Council until 1971. And China was out of it, which is 1/4 of the world population was not in the UN system. So I think that India actually is intellectually speaking in a very good position because we always had that discourse of if you call it, if you like strategic autonomy or non-alignment, so we were not in a camp, right? So why should we, with China, why should we be in Chinese camp or American camp or Russian camp? We could be all of them. Okay.
Okay. So, I think at the time almost here. We are going to have a lunch after talk. And we have like 3 or 5 seats available. So if any of you are interested to continue the conversation, you can join us.